Homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. In today's session, we're looking at understanding the difference between the worldly path and the Buddha's Noble Path. In the past few Poya sessions, we've looked at some of the meditations where the Buddha encourages us towards the wholesome determinations and inclinations. So the adhitthana binivesa, that are helpful towards Nibbana, that are helpful towards the non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion path. So we've looked at Satchadhitthana, which is the determination for truth, Chagadhitthana, which is the determination for relinquishment, Panyadhitthana, which is the determination for wisdom, and then finally Upasamadhi-adhitthana, which is the determination for calm. So the questions that normally arise around this are around the worldly path. What are we usually determining which is different? And it may seem obvious, but we haven't enunciated or elaborated very much on it from a sutta. So there's a sutta that is very useful, which is the Khattiya Sutta. It's in Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 6, discourse number 52. But it helps us to look at this a little bit deeper, because there's a Brahmin who asks the Buddha a number of questions, looking at different groups of people in the world. So when we look at this sutta, it helps us to compare and contrast, and also to understand a little bit better what are people's, motivations when they're in the world, and also what is that distinction when you start to walk the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path. So let's begin. The sutta begins with the Brahmin JΑNUSSONI asking a series of questions of the Buddha, and he asks these questions in relation to different groups of people. So the questions that he asks are, what is their wish? What is their quest? What is their determination? And what is their inclination? And finally, what is their final goal? Now, the groups of people that he asks about are Khattiyas, which is members of a ruling class. So this could also be royalty. And that includes the ruler or the leader or even the king. Then he asks about Brahmins, so it's people similar to him. And then he asks about householders, so everyday lay people. Then he specifically asks about the category of women. And then he goes in to ask about the category of thieves or robbers. And then finally he asks about samanas, ascetics or recluses. Now, the questions that he asks, the first one is, what is the wish? The wish is similar to intention or desire. So the Pali word here is adipeya. So it could also mean someone's ambition. The second question is the quest. So the Pali word here is upavichara. So what are they preoccupied with? What are they seeking out? Then the third one is what is their determination? So we've come across this word before. It's adhitthana. It could also be translated as resolution. What are they dedicated to? And what is their support in what they're doing? And then the fourth one is, what is their inclination? So we know this as an intent. Abhinivesa is the Pali word. It could also mean adherence, something that is holding together their decision or their determination. And then pariyosana is the final one, which is the final goal. Sometimes also translated as end goal, the ultimate goal or perfection. So these are the things that JANUSSONI has come to ask the Buddha about. The Buddha answers JANUSSONI according to each of the different categories of people. And so I've transcribed the Buddha's answer into a bit of a table or diagram. So along the top you have the different categories of people. So you have the ruling class, the Brahmins, the householders, the women, the thieves, and the ascetics. And then down the left you have wish, which is the adipeya, the quest, which is upavichara, determination, which is adhitthana, inclination, which is abhinivesa, and then the final goal, which is pariyosana. So we can go through each of the categories first, and then we can compare and contrast what is similar and what is different, and probably draw out a few things. So if we look at the ruling class, their wish is for wealth, their quest is for wisdom, they determine for power, and their inclination is territory or land. And their final goal is supremacy or domination, sovereignty. You can see that in the world right now by looking at royalty, political elite, business elite. it's very clear that determination is always for power. Even during difficult times, you see they're holding strongly to power. They use their power. And of course, the inclination is to have land or territory or other assets. Then what really is their goal is supremacy or domination. You can see that really playing out right now. So when it comes to Brahmins then, what is their wish? Their wish is for wealth, so it's similar. Quest is for wisdom, again similar. Determination is for chants, could be incantations, depends on how you want to translate that. But quite often you see Brahmins there chanting mantras. Then their inclination is towards sacrifice, so they're always making sacrifice to the gods. And then their final goal is the Brahma world. Then you have the category of householders, and their wish is for wealth. The quest is for wisdom. The determination is for skill. So this could be your trade, it could be your professional skills, it could be your craft. Then when it comes to their inclination, then it's around work, business, doing business, or it could be in terms of work, the career. So that's very familiar to all of us who are lay people. And then the final goal is completing the work. So it could be reaching the highest goal in relation to the work, whatever your career or ambition is. And then when it comes to women, the wish, and now remember this is at the time of the Buddha, so the wish is for a man. The quest is for adornments or jewelry or decoration. Determination is for sons. This is very true in particular cultures and particularly at the time of the Buddha. And then the inclination is towards being without a rival, so not having any competition in regards to, for a woman at that time, it would have been as a mother, so the role of a mother. And then the final goal was supremacy, authority. And then in relation to the groups of thieves, their wish is to steal, is towards stealing. Their quest is to find a hiding place, so an impenetrable hiding place. So in relation to the Buddha's answer, it was in a jungle, but we know that now it could be in any place that's impenetrable. And then their determination is towards their craft, so it could be their thieving craft. And their inclination is towards darkness, so it could be literal darkness, but it could be darkness that hides them. And then their final goal is not to be seen, not to be caught. The final category that JANUSSONI asks about is ascetics, so samanas. And the wish that samanas have is for patience and gentleness. So with the path, you can understand that as a softening and to be able to be patient in developing the path, patient with those around, and patient with the spiritual faculties developing. And of course, gentleness means that you are turning more towards non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion, rather than what is of the world, more of greed, hatred, and delusion, which tends to harden you, tends to make you more fierce. And then the quest is also towards wisdom. Determination is towards their virtuous conduct, that is what they use as their raft. And the inclination is towards nothingness, owning nothing, having nothing. And then the final goal is nibbana, like full liberation, extinguishment. What we can see from this table is that there are a few areas where there are similarities. So in terms of the wish, adhipeya, ruling class Brahmins, householders, they have very similar wish, and that is for wealth. So that's for gain. Gain in material possessions, gain in assets. And then when it comes to the quest, which is the upavichara, you can see that the ruling class, the Brahmins, the householders, and the ascetics, they all yearn for wisdom. So wisdom being knowledge. In the case of the ascetic, it's different. The wisdom that is being sought is the wisdom to get out of samsara, to get out of this endless cycle of suffering. Whereas for a householder, Brahmin, and ruling class, that's not necessarily the case. Only when a householder changes that to actually become a seika, then that will change to wisdom of how to get out of this mess, rather than just simply worldly wisdom. Then when you look at the final goal, it was interesting to see that in terms of the ruling class and in terms of women, it really comes down to supremacy. So in terms of the ruling class, supremacy could be over the entire world, whereas women may not be associated with the entire world, but their household, their families, that they have the authority over that. And the ruling class, of course, is more worldly in the sense of maybe entire domination of the world, authority of the whole world. You can see some of that playing out right now. Now, the reason why this sutta is very helpful is because as we've been meditating, we've been actually letting go or attempting to let go of some of the worldly determinations and, of course, the inclination. And as you make spiritual growth and development on the Noble Eightfold Path, you find that some of these things will lose their power over you. And it is also a source of being able to understand why there is conflict, disrespect, non-approval when you are a householder and you're turning towards the Dhamma path. If we look a little bit about that, I think that is quite helpful. When you look at a householder, we have our skill, we studied very, very hard, or if you're a student, you're studying very hard with the expectation that you will be able to get a good job, which becomes, the inclination, clearly. So that's the relationship. You train very hard at your skill, your trade, whatever it is. So whether it's a plumber, an accountant, a doctor, what have you, then your expectation is through studying or training for it, you can get a job. Now, once you get the job, which is the work or the business, you either want to own your own company or you work for someone. And when you work for someone, of course, there's always different things that you aspire to. And that's the nature of work, that once you begin work, there is a career ladder. And so if you're in a trade, for example, you might start out as an apprentice, but then you become fully qualified and then you become very experienced. And then at some point after working for someone, you might go and have your own business. In terms of a professional, then you might start out as a junior in a company. You could be an intern who is unpaid, and then what happens is you graduate and you get a paying job, and then you look ahead and you think, okay, I want a promotion, I want more money. And so on and on it goes until you reach the top, if that is your aspiration, if that is your inclination. When we look at where the world is, the stream of the world is around how you fit into that. And so that is where the stream is going. Now, when you decide to not follow that stream, to actually maybe follow the spiritual path, then you are swapping onto closer to the ascetic path. So what is their determination? Their determination is for virtuous conduct. So that's why when you think about the Noble Eightfold Path, right speech, right action, right livelihood, and right intention, all these things underpin what we are doing in order to complete the path. So when it comes to virtuous conduct, that's our determination. So we change from focusing on the skill. And so we want to become more skilled at our virtue. And then when it comes to inclination, well, on this path, we know there's a lot of renunciation. There's a lot of letting go, abandoning of defilements, of hindrances, of acquisitions. And acquisition will also include our roles, our material things. So there is going against the stream. So when you see that, you realize that when it comes to how we live our life and then we go along onto the spiritual path, for some people it may be very, very pronounced. So when you give up your job, even as a householder, and maybe you don't ordain, then you recognize when people ask you, oh, what do you do? What's your job? You no longer fit into the social norm of holding a job. Maybe you've decided to only work part-time. So even the answer to that is not the norm. And I mean, there are different names that are called, like at the moment in China, I saw something called tamping, which is lying flat. So this is a way of people deprioritizing ambition or career, and instead they balance it out. They might take a job that doesn't use their university skills. They might decide to go and own a little shop. And that is very threatening to society, because not many people particularly the ruling class, they don't really want to see that. So when it comes to householders, again, when you're in a society which is dictated by who you are and what you do, it becomes very difficult when you give up the job or go part-time or deprioritize the skill and the job. So you have a lot of practitioners who are doctors, accountants, people very skilled at their trade, and they've decided to actually work less. And for some people to work not at all. And part of that is because of the spiritual path, that at some point you want to give up livelihood. And of course, the fast track to that is to ordaining as a monk or nun. And that's not something that all lay people can do. And it is also not something that is easy. And so for that reason, you try and do the change in determination and the inclination simply by slowly chipping away, slowly reorganizing your life, deprioritizing career even. So when a spiritual person who is trying to develop the path, when they relate to the social convention of lay people, it becomes increasingly difficult, because people who are toiling in the world, more worldly, they tend to judge you, and they have nothing else to judge you on except the convention. And so it's very useful not to fight it, just to understand that that's where the difference comes, that at some point on the spiritual path you decide, I'm actually not going to focus any longer on the skill. I'm not going to make career the sole priority of my life. For some people it's balancing it, and then eventually you get what you need from your job, but nothing more. You know, it's simply for money and for nothing more about respect or approval or anything like that. And that's one of the things about roles. Roles play a very huge part in driving us. So when you look at the group of women, in this case, all things aside about how our modern society is, but at the time of the Buddha, the role of a woman was to actually bear children, to marry and bear children. And so it was very much that you sought out a partner, or you were arranged in terms of being married, but then you were always seeking sons. The sons were seen as being able to carry the family name, being able to have passed down certain things. And so you were seen very favorably if you gave birth to sons. And that also applied to royalty as well in terms of their women. And so when it comes to the role of a woman, the inclination is always not to be the best, actually, to be the best mother, to birth the best child. And so when you think about the Buddha's mother, she's probably the perfection of that. When you think about all the different children out in the world, no one can beat the Buddha's mother in that respect, because she gave birth to the Buddha, and there is no comparison to a Buddha. So that's another way of understanding it. And you can put different other categories there. So for example, you could put the Dhamma teacher as another group. And if you look at the determination of a Dhamma teacher, it's really around also Dhamma knowledge and their insight. So that is their determination, that it's again like a skill, that you know a lot of the Buddha's words, you understand a lot of the Buddha's words, and you have insight into them through your own meditation and practice. And then what is the inclination is towards invitations to teach to students who come and want to learn. And so that becomes the inclination. This answer from the Buddha is very helpful in enabling us to see where things stand. And of course, most people are quite interested in ruling class, that they're always determining for power, and there's always a power grab that is happening. And so most of what people focus on in the world is what's happening with the ruling class. So when you look at politics, business leaders, royalty, there is a fixation on what they do. But if you whittle it down to what is their determination and inclination, it gets very precise and actually quite obvious. You don't really need to seek out any more. Why do we go to the news to go and find out more, when really they're all about power and land and domination is the final goal? So in many ways, it's defeats the purpose of always going to look, because that will always be their inclination. And so as householders, when you give up the skill and you give up buying into the job, the career, having a successful business and all of that as the priority, it doesn't mean you give it up because you need to have a roof over your head and to look after the people that you care about. But it means that you see it for what it is. And so you may not go for each of the promotions and all these sorts of things because it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of things to sustain and maintain it, and a lot of drive. So in the world, you tend to put the vidya, the energy and the effort towards the worldly things. And so that is not very helpful towards the spiritual path. Instead, one needs to, if you're very serious about the spiritual path, you need to change it towards the spiritual path, redirect it away. And so that means you might still have your job and those sorts of things, but you may not prioritize it as highly as you would have done before, knowing this. And in terms of even worldly wisdom, you may be disinclined to know so much about the world, to even gather information about history, about science, about all these things, because you realize the true wisdom that you want to acquire is the wisdom that the Buddha has, the wisdom that sharpens the faculties, the powers, and that enables you towards Nibbana. So in contrast to the Khattiya Sutta and more of the worldly determinations other than the Samanas, but what we've been meditating on all this way through, particularly in the last 3 Poya full moon sessions, we've been looking at 4 determinations, and very specifically when we were looking at the profitable path, so when we looked at the Chunda Sutta. But we also touched on it when we're looking at painful practice with slow realization, that meditation. So the first doorway to Nibbana. We looked at the determination for truth as part of that insight pathway. But also in last Poya, when we're looking at the Haladikani Sutta, that having left home to roam without an abode, that you are not intimate with the village, you are rid of sensual pleasures, you don't have engage in future expectations, and you don't get into disputes. This is because you give up the worldly determinations in order to have these particular determinations. That the first one is the determination for truth, that you see that what is in the world is false and deceptive because of the unlasting nature, subject to change, and not worth taking as me and mine. You know, it always comes back to suffering. And so the determination for truth is to be able to realize Nibbana because it doesn't slide. So that's the only thing that is truthful and undeceptive. And when it comes to the relinquishment, determination for relinquishment, Chagaditana, this is really about relinquishing all acquisitions. So when you realize that craving leads to suffering, you realize you need to give up everything. And that's why the samana, the inclination, is towards nothing, like owning nothing, acquiring nothing. And then the third determination is the determination for wisdom. So the knowledge of the destruction of all suffering. So this is the highest wisdom, is knowing the cessation of all suffering. And again, when you realize through wisdom that the 5 aggregates of clinging, it's not what you thought it was. When you look at the 4 great elements, again, you know it's not what you thought it was. Same with consciousness and all things associated with that. It's not what you thought it was. It's still constructed. And then when it comes to the 4th, which is the determination for calm, this is really the pacification, the making everything peaceful. So there is no longer any greed or lust, there's no longer any hate, and there's no longer any delusion. And so the Buddha says in the Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta, and this is Majjhima Nikaya number 140, the Buddha says one should not neglect wisdom, should preserve the truth, should cultivate relinquishment, and should train for calm. And so this is really what we've been doing in all our meditations, is to do this. And the the Buddha goes on to say, the tides of conceiving do not sweep over one who stands upon these determinations, and when the tides of conceiving no longer sweep over them, one is called a sage who is calm, a muni. So when you look at all the patipadas, the modes of practice, so you have the painful practices with fast and slow realization, or quick and slow realization. You have the pleasant practices with quick and slow realization. So you have the dukkha paripadas and the sukha paripadas, and it's danda binya, kipa binya. These are resting on, or we make the determination for these 4 determinations when we walk those insight pathways, when we cultivate those meditations. And they're very, very helpful, because otherwise you're still going with the world, and it makes it very, very difficult to actually get out of samsara. So just to recap and just link it. So when we looked at painful practice with slow realization, so this is the first profitable direction, which leads to the first doorway to Nibbana, metta appamana, immeasurable loving kindness. We looked at the Asubha Sutta, which gave the instructions for how to do this meditation, that the meditation objects are really 5-fold. That the first one is you contemplate the unattractiveness of the body, you perceive the repulsiveness of food, you have this perception of non-delight in the entire world, you contemplate the impermanence of all conditioned phenomena, and you also have the perception of death well established internally. So we focused, when we ran that session, we focused on number 1 and number 2. The last 2 Poya sessions, we've really focused on number 3 and 4. And when you look at this particular meditation, we were really trying to penetrate and pierce through dukkha. That when we do this meditation, particularly in the example that we used was undigested food, we were really looking to raise our minds, lift our minds, in order to see that we were actually in the cow dung. We're a bit like the fly in the cow dung, not realizing that we're actually in cow dung. And when you meditate on this particular insight pathway, you actually get a taste of Nibbana through the jhanas. And so when you do that, what happens is you start to see dukkha correctly. You start to see how it comes to arise and how it doesn't come to arise. And knowing that, you make the determination for truth. And so this particular meditation, if you have been practicing it, it's very, very powerful. And so this is the intersection with this particular meditation, that you see dukkha very, very clearly. It's not personal, it's a universal, common dukkha that we are all subject to. We're subject to unlastingness, so there's no permanency. We know this through death, but we also know because we're subject to change, ripening of the body, aging. And for that reason, we keep experiencing this vipranama dukkha, the sliding nature of it. And so it's not me and mine, it's anatta. So when you do this, it's very helpful, because then that determination for truth becomes very, very real at the moment in the meditation. And then when we looked at the Chunda Sutta, and we looked at the particular verse that the Buddha uttered in the Chunda Sutta about, by giving merit grows, no hate is stored for one restrained. One who is skilled abandons evil ways. With exhaustion of lust, hatred and delusion, one attains complete extinguishment. So we saw this as a meditation on non-greed, non-hatred, non-delusion, leading to the highest fruit of the path. And in this meditation, we went through each of the determinations that the Buddha had given, which is for relinquishment, for wisdom, for truth, and for calm. And there was a particular sequence to how we looked at that. And so you can see that when you look at this, you really understand how different parts of the Dhamma come together. And so that's how it also intersects when it comes to giving up the worldly determinations or standpoints. Like when we're generous, we're giving up acquisitions. So we're going against the grasping, taking up, gaining. And when we make the determination for wisdom, we're really going against the worldly wisdom and going towards the spiritual wisdom, the wisdom that the Buddha talks about. And then when we make the determination for truth, It's not the worldly truth of science and knowledge and all the things that keep us coming back to samsara. It's the truth that leads us out of samsara towards nibbana. And then the final one is the determination for calm. So out in the world, we're always toiling and going out through our sense faculties. We create our world through the sense faculties. And therefore, when we come to the determination for calm, we're actually calming our sense faculties down. We're making them peaceful. And we're actually saying there is nothing out in the world that is going to bring us supreme happiness. And only Nibbana is the case. And with Saddha to Buddha, conviction towards Buddha, that we actually are able to say that. So we give up our tendencies towards the world. And so that's how this one also intersects. And so last Poya we looked at this contemplating the Haladikani Sutta. And really this is where it also intersects, because what we were seeing is how we created the world through our sense faculties, and knowing that when we are inclined, we crave the world that we create from what we see with our eye, smell with our nose, taste with our tongue, hear with our ears, and do with our bodies, and then also our mind. Then what happens is we are no longer leaning towards Nibbana, we're back out into the world, and we're not seeing the sliding nature of the world, that we have to keep constructing and reconstructing over and over again to sustain happiness. In actual fact, what keeps happening is we suffer. So with the Haladikani, again, the encouragement is always towards the determinations that the Buddha gives us, to see the truth very, very clearly, to relinquish all the essential pleasures, intimacy in the village, and to not have expectations. The one about expectations is our hopes and dreams, and they're always very worldly hopes and dreams for gain, for respect, for popularity. And where we end up time and time again, what we saw in the Haladikani, is that we end up always in dispute because of our loved ones, dispute because of our views. And the strongest one in Haladikani is taking things as me and mine. And so that's a very, very worldly standpoint, where you misapprehend the five aggregate subject of clinging, and you believe everything and about me and mine, and you constantly mind-making. So when it comes to these determinations, you need to swap them to the Buddha's wholesome determination. So again, this is how it intersects with the Haladikani Sutta. There have been some questions about the definition of a samana, and whether that's simply a monk or nun who is walking the Buddha's path. But when you go to the Maha-Asapura Sutta in Majjhima Nikaya number 39, the Buddha actually defines what is a samana. So samana we normally call ascetic or recluse, but it doesn't explain itself very, very well. So the Buddha actually says that this particular person is one who has quieted down evil, unwholesome states that defile, bring renewal of being, give trouble, ripen in suffering, and lead to future birth, aging, and death. So it's someone who is actually calmed, a muni that has a calm mind, and has actually completed path and fruit of an arahant, I would say. But the qualities that a samana actually has are very interesting. So the Buddha lists out 10. The first is moral shame and fear of wrongdoing, so hiri-ottappa. Purity in bodily, verbal, and mental conduct. So really this is the dasa kusala, that you have that. Purity in livelihood, so this is the samma ajiva. Guards the doors to the sense faculties. So that means that you have indriya guttadvaro. Moderation in eating, bojane matanyu. Wakefulness, which is jagriyang. Mindfulness and clear comprehension, which is sati sampajanya. And then abandons the 5 hindrances, so you're no longer troubled by panchanibbana. And then you have the 4 mental absorptions, so you have the 4 form jhanas. And then you have 3 knowledges, so the tevijja, so you can see past lives, and also with the divine eye you can see where beings are coming and going into different worlds. And then you also know how to uproot the taints. So they're really the 3 Buddha knowledges. So when you look at this, you actually see there's a distinction, and you also see some of the sacred qualities in here. So you see the guarding the doors to the sense faculties, moderation in eating, wakefulness. These are sacred qualities. So are the 4 jhanas, that's also sacred qualities, and so are the 3 knowledges are sacred qualities. And of course, anything to do with purity, sila sampano, accomplished in virtue, so purity in bodily, verbal, and mental contact, that is also a sacred quality. So there is a intersection, but a little bit more when it comes to a samana. So it's good to know when you look at the determination of a samana, it is to virtuous conduct, because that helps you to walk the Noble Eightfold Path. It's not the end of the Noble Eightfold Path, but it's part of the Noble Eightfold Path. And then when you look at the inclination, there is nothing. Nothingness is what is inclined to for a samana. And that is because you realize that you need to give up tanha in order to have the cessation of dukkha. So tanha is usually about our acquisitions, about the people that we acquire in our lives, the material things, also the defilements, even these aggregates that form up our own bodies. And so when you give that all up, then you realize extinguishment, nibbana, full awakening. So it's very interesting when you look at that. You look at the determination for a samana and you look at the inclination. It tells you a lot. And so when you look at the one for the householder, you actually need to give up your worldly tendency to know what is happening in the world, to be dictated by the world about your job and your skill, and to be okay with saying, I'm no longer working. So it could be because you've retired or because you've managed to rearrange your finances that enable you to work part-time or to not work at all. And when you think about the danger that the Buddha says in terms of transmigrating from lifetime to lifetime to experience suffering, you realize giving up the job, giving up the prestige and the reputation, the approval of society is something that you're prepared to do, because this is only one lifetime, and the countless lifetimes after, well, that's much, much more. And so that's why there's a bit of a conflict when it comes to lay people who are walking the Buddha's path and being seen favorably. You need to accept that you won't be seen favorably in the world. Buddha created the monastic order so that there was a conventional norm. Householders who don't ordain, we don't fall into any particular category. We are still householders, but that yardstick can be very harsh for us because we are not conforming to what society wants, but yet we're not ordaining. And so when you ordain, it's quite clear you have a particular conventional place in the world, but householders who are more reclusive, who are more inclined towards the samana path, which is the Noble Eightfold Path, then that's where one has to admit that it gets difficult, and that's where some of the challenges come. But there are many of us who are actually walking this path in this way as householders, as lay people. And so you take it on the chin, you understand this is where it's at. You're not meant to be accepted by the world. You're not meant to be praised or respected for what you decide. And if you ordain, it's slightly different. It's because you have been given a place by the Buddha to not have to endure the disrespect, the disapproval. Some of the things that people say are, oh, you're not paying taxes, or you're useless, or you have no motivation, where's your ambition? You should go and study, you should reskill, you should go and do your own business. And even for people that decide not to get married and have children, it's the same thing. On the samana path, you're not looking to acquire anything more. So even as a householder, if you decide not to get married, it's not conventionally accepted, but on the Dhamma path, there's probably a reason why you're doing that. And if you don't choose to have kids and you are married, it could be the same thing. Now that's not necessarily conventionally accepted, maybe a little bit more so now in modern society, but at the same time, it's not something that's conventionally done. And so people will judge you for it. Oh, why don't you want to have kids? Why don't you want to get married? This is what we do. Our family members who are not on the Dhamma path, they would be forcing us, bullying us in order to do those things. And if you're younger and you don't choose to study, you'd rather do something simple that would earn you money, or study in a more easeful way, but you want to balance it with at least progressing on the path. Sometimes that's frowned upon because parents would say, oh, but you need to be the best, and we worry that you won't have enough money, and all these sorts of things. And some of it is valid, but there is a conflict there. So if you're experiencing conflict in that respect, but you have a very high inclination towards Dhamma, then know that there will always be this impasse, this rub, collision between certain things if you remain a householder. And if you ordain, there are different challenges there. So we always, on this spiritual path, we know there are no ideals. Now the Buddha set up something as a mechanism, but even within living in community and doing certain things, trying to complete the path, it's not always easy. There are different challenges. So in this way, it can be very interesting and very useful to actually talk about this. There is also a powerful contemplation that comes with looking at these worldly standpoints or worldly determinations and the noble one. So when you're a householder, a layperson, and you develop your skill, your profession, your trade, and you get the job, run the business, or have career aspirations, what we really think is it's good to live like this. That's the general feeling in society. It's good to live like this. And where we get to in our current position is we've made something in the past that said it was good like that before, or you see it in another person and you think, oh, they've got it good. And so you make a choice to study, to train, to get work experience, to climb the career ladder, or to be a successful business person. And what we don't realize with that particular thought, the thought that look back at the past and is looking towards the future, is that it is steeped in wrong view, because that view is always around me and mine. So the Atta is the one that is making those decisions. It wants to be someone. It wants to have a particular role. It wants approval, respect, gain. And it is something that is outside of Nibbana. So this is the supramundane path. So that's why this is a powerful contemplation if you are very inclined towards Nibbana. When you make the decision to actually keep going towards the career, the job, and the worldly determinations, then you're making decisions out of delusion. That is where it's coming from. There is wrong view and therefore there is delusion. It's covering up Nibbana. You're taking something outside of Nibbana. And so then through moha, through the delusion, you are driving greed because you want that position, you want the money, you want the gain, you want something for yourself. You're adding to the sense of self. And you're expecting society, knowingly or unknowingly, to approve of you in doing so. So when you look at what that leads to, it actually leads to a lot of wrong actions. Now we don't see it. We start to behave in certain ways that include the wrong kind of livelihood as a result of that. And it's decided really by wrong view. So when you compare the highest right view, it only has Nibbana. The highest right view only has Nibbana. It doesn't take anything outside of Nibbana. Because everything outside of Nibbana is false and deceptive. It's not permanent or lasting. It's subject to change and therefore subject to dukkha. As a result of that, you can't take that as me and mine. Now, dukkha nirodha really, the cessation of dukkha is really the highest right view. And so when you're continually toiling and seeking from the world, if you never turn away from the world, then you are continually breeding the wrong view. Now this is more in a higher sense, So in practice, one as a householder still needs to work, but in the sense of contemplation, one really needs to see that distinction. That becomes a very, very powerful meditation. If you truly understand stealing as in taking what is not given, then you understand that as living with greed. So it's a higher practice. So stealing conventionally means you take something out of someone's pocket without permission, you steal from the company, you go rob a bank, you do some sort of corruption in government, all those sorts of things. But in Buddha's supramundane path, stealing means living with greed. So if you are greedily going for the job, which we all do, when you are climbing the career ladder, when you are wanting to build your business and make it bigger, any permutation of all those things, then essentially you're living with greed. So when you live with greed, this drives wrong action. So it drives taking what is not given. It may even drive other kinds of misconduct. And as a result of that, when we talk about our livelihood in the world as householders, what we normally say is, I'm a doctor, or I own my own plumbing company, or I'm a business person, or I'm a tech guru, or whatever it is. There is conceit in the livelihood. And what does that smell like? That smells like me and mine. I do this job and I know these things. I do this job and I can live like this. In the supramundane path, it's something that can be a very, very powerful meditation. So the insight pathway is really saying that stealing or taking what is not given is really living with greed. When you live with greed, then you really are cultivating the wrong actions. When you cultivate the wrong actions, it leads to the wrong livelihood. So if you can see that, then you can see the conceit that comes with that. And so it becomes very smelly when you actually look at this meditation. You see what really stinks about that thing. You could see it in other people when they speak about their jobs and what they believe in. I can live like this, it's fine. And I'm really proud of my job and everything. Then you can also see it in oneself. And so this is very high Dhamma. It's not the mundane path. The mundane path is you just refrain from the types of things that the Buddha says are not good livelihood. But in this one, it takes it to a higher level. And so when you really see it, it's very powerful. The meditation can go very, very refined. We can end the session here. Let's share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Blessings of the Triple Gem. Wishing you well. Teruan Saranai.